To the surprise of many, Lucasfilm is indeed bringing back Rey and telling more stories set in the sequel trilogy time period. This is frankly pretty shocking for a lot of fans, but I have heard even more shocking revelations about all the crazy stuff that Lucasfilm is gonna do with the sequel trilogy character. So in this video, I want to spill some tea and also speculate based on what I have heard as to what the actual plan is here and how the fan base is gonna react to all of it. There's some good in here, there's a lot of bad, and even more weirdness, so why don't you smash a freaking like on this video and let's begin. So first up, I want to just go over the status of the other sequel trilogy characters and sort of fill in what was the plan initially to bring these characters back and what is this next 2025 Star Wars movie going to be about. From what I understand, it has been the case that Lucasfilm has been in discussions with a lot of the main actors from the sequel trilogy, and they have been having discussions about bringing them all back for some time. I was told that the status on Oscar Isaac's Poe is pretty solid. I think Oscar Isaac would absolutely come back, and I do expect him to be in this 2025 Star Wars movie. I was also randomly told that Rose Tico is also going to be coming back, so there's that. Now, when it comes to John Boyega's Finn, he has been pretty resistant and very vocal with how he feels about his time during the sequel trilogy, and there's major friction between him and between Disney. But regardless of all of that, I believe Disney is offering him a ton of money. In fact, I have heard this from some very reliable sources that they badly want to get John Boyega back and have Finn in this 2025 movie as well. After all, if Rey is coming back and reestablishing the Jedi Order, it would just make sense that Finn would be a part of that, as he was revealed to be Force sensitive in The Rise of Skywalker, and he was badly trying to tell Rey about that. I'm still not 100% sure if Boyega is actually going to take all of that money and come back, but I would assume he will. Frankly, he's positioned himself in a way that he's very valuable to Disney to come back, partially because of how vocal he has been speaking against Disney and speaking about frustrations during the time period of the sequel trilogy. Like, it's a really feel-good story if despite all of that, he's willing to come back. It sort of calms everything down. It makes Disney look good. It makes them, seem like they're learning, like they're willing to learn and connect and sort of build bridges with people like John Boyega. Daisy Ridley is all about it, and she's very willing to come back to the role, and I assume they're giving her a boatload of cash as well. I, in fact, think that any character that was in all three of the sequel movies coming back to Star Wars would get something like legacy royalties. I was told that this is a thing a long time ago with certain people in the Star Wars franchise. It's like if you do a certain amount of projects, your royalty numbers go way up. So essentially, getting any of these characters is a big price tag. However, and this is where it gets kind of weird, I was also told that they're not the main characters for this movie. So it's like super weird. I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is how is this movie going to feature people like John Boyega, going to feature Poe Dameron, going to feature maybe Rose Tico, and of course going to feature Rey herself, and yet not have them as the main characters and the focus of the movie. When we were following along with all of the scoops from Jeff Snyder about this film, he was talking about how it's going to have a person or persons of color be the main characters in the film, but it was going to feature characters like Rey. That lines up with what we heard from Star Wars Celebration. They in fact talk about how this is going to feature Rey and her rebuilding the Jedi Order 15 years after the rise of Skywalker. And the reason this is confusing is because I'm like, how is Disney going to pay all this money to bring these characters back and yet not have them as the main characters and focus of the film? On top of that, how is it a compelling enough story to go back to this time period 15 years after Rey defeats Palpatine, and yet it's not a trilogy and the two movies coming out after it are going back in time? So it feels so weird. Like, Like, why is it such an important deal to go back to this time period, and yet it's not compelling enough to warrant its own trilogy, and it's not compelling enough to make Rey and Finn and Poe the main characters of the movie? And I think in part, this movie is being created to create a new Jedi Order with Rey, to actually establish more canon past the Rise of Skywalker for purposes that are not strictly story purposes, like for purposes of merchandising, for purposes of building out the parks and making the content machine for Disney be able to continue with a status quo after the Rise of Skywalker. But there's another element at play here that has me even more confused and frankly a little bit intrigued on what might be going on with the Jedi and with Rey during this film. This is where Adam Driver and Ben Solo come into the picture, because I was told several years ago that Lucasfilm was hiring a bunch of different writers to write spec scripts on a trilogy that would be surrounding the idea of Ben Solo being resurrected. This is not uncommon in Hollywood for a studio to go out there and hire a bunch of writers or pay people to come up with a bunch of different ideas or spec scripts that they will then farm and have other writers come on board and write fully fleshed out scripts. Like, one of the best examples of this is the fact that the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was adapted from a spec script from a Marvel Studios staff writer. James Gunn then comes in, takes that spec script, fills it in, and completely fills out the ideas and gives us the first Guardians movie. But it doesn't always happen where these spec scripts go anywhere, right? Sometimes studios will hire people, get some cool ideas, and then just leave it on the shelf, never to fully explore it. But the thing that's really interesting about this is that this was for a trilogy past the Rise of Skywalker that was completely focused on the resurrection of Ben Solo. They were trying to get all kinds of different writers to come up with ideas and ways that this could happen within the Star Wars lore. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because over the course of this weekend, with all the crazy stuff coming out about Rey returning to Star Wars, I reached out to some very reliable sources to ask if there's still a plan for Ben Solo. And I was told, yes, Adam Driver is somebody that they want to bring back to the franchise, and they want to resurrect Ben Solo in some way, shape, or form. And so it's possible that this next film will center around that idea or concept. Maybe that is the actual conflict with somebody like Ben Solo, or even Kylo Ren, the evil version of Ben Solo, being brought back. And of course, the dyad is a really interesting concept in Star Wars lore that has not been fully explored. It is apparently powerful enough to be something that Palpatine desperately wanted, something once in a generation, something really, really ridiculous. And so it's possible that itself, the dyad, is actually the way to just bring Ben Solo back. But I gotta say, if that's the level of the idea that they are working with, it still seems so weird that you wouldn't just do that with a trilogy. That's a major, major thing happening to the galaxy of Star Wars and to the Skywalker bloodline. So if that is indeed something that's being set up in this movie, perhaps this movie will lead into another trilogy or more projects down the line. Now, look, guys, I understand being skeptical of this whole entire situation. I understand not wanting Rey to come back, not wanting Rey to be the person to re-establish the Jedi Order. That's something we wanted from Luke. That's what Luke did in Legends. And I totally get a lot of the hate for the sequel trilogy. And look, at the end of the day, if this movie is just whatever and just kind of pushes the ball slightly forward for the debauchery that we got during the sequels, I will argue that's not good enough. And I think a lot of fans will have every right to be furious with Lucasfilm. But it is also possible that this movie is cooking something crazy, something really interesting, and will lead in to more stories about Ben Solo, the Force, Rey, Finn, the Jedi, the new Republic, and some really epic stuff that I think all fans could appreciate. So I guess at the end of the day, we're just going to have to wait and see as more details come out about this new Star Wars movie in 2025 featuring Rey Skywalker, other sequel trilogy characters, and perhaps still playing around with the idea of Ben Solo coming back. I, of course, want to know what you think about this, so let me know in the comment section below. Smash a like on this video. And if you want to watch more, why not check out this video I just did breaking down insane reveals about the Ahsoka show, about the Mandoverse, and about Dave Filoni's Heir to the Empire film.